Hello everyone, in this video we're going to talk about what is known as the simple interest formula. So before we get into what the formula actually is, let's talk about what interest is, what principal is, and what simple interest is. So interest, just in the generic form, is just money paid or earned for using or lending money. So interest can be good, you're making money on your investment, or interest can be bad where you borrowed some money and now you have to repay that money, but there's a little bit of interest. So now let's say you borrowed $100,000, but now at the end of paying that off, you've actually paid off $170,000 or something because of that interest, okay? Principal, this is the amount of money borrowed or deposited. Think of it as like the initial deposit. If you're depositing money, you're trying to earn some interest, or the initial amount that you borrowed, the loan amount that you're gonna repay, plus a little bit of that interest like we talked about in that $100,000 loan example. And then simple interest is just money paid or earned only on the principal. So there is such a thing as compound interest, where you have a principal amount and you earn interest on that, and then that interest gets added to the principal, and now you're earning interest on the new sum of money. So compound interest is a great thing, especially in terms of investment in money. Simple interest, on the other hand, is still good, but you're only earning interest on that initial principal. So the interest that you earn, yes, is added to your account, but the additional interest that you continue to earn is not on the new sum of money. It is just on that initial deposit of the principal amount that you put in. So we have a formula. It is I equals PRT. So I stands for our simple interest. P is the principal or the initial deposit. R is our annual interest rate, annual meaning each year, and that is as a decimal in the equation. And then T is time, and that's in years. So be careful with time, because if you have, for example, 6 months, that would be half of a year, so we would plug in 1/2 for T, okay? So there's different ways that we could be presented with questions about simple interest. Maybe we need to find the interest, maybe we need to find the principal, maybe we need to find the interest rate or the time, something like that. So we're actually gonna look at 4 different examples that all deal with this equation, okay? So example number 1, we're gonna find a balance. So we're given some information, and we wanna figure out the missing part, and in this case, the missing part is gonna be the balance of the account. So it tells us we're depositing $500. We have an interest rate of 3% per year, and it says, what is the balance after 5 years? So we have our initial deposit, that would be our principal. We have our interest rate, that would be R, and then we have 5 years, which is time. So we have P, R, and T. We need to figure out the interest, and then we want to add that interest back to our deposit, which was $500. So we could write I am equal to, just kidding. I equals 500 times times the rate. Now we're going to write this as a decimal, so that would be 0.03, and then 5 years, okay? So we can crank out the calculator for this. 500 times 0.03 times 5, and that gives me $75 in interest, okay? So I is 75. Now we want to add that back to our initial deposit, so we do $500 plus $75 to get a balance of $575. So after 5 years, we deposit $500, we actually make $75. So now the account balance should be $575, okay? So that's how we can find a balance. Now let's look at how we can find an annual interest rate. So we're depositing $350, that would be our principal. We've earned simple interest of $17.50 in 2.5 years. What is the interest rate? So now we know what I is. I is $17.50. The principal is $350. We don't know the interest rate, but we do know it took us 2.5 years. So we'll just write the R right there. Notice how I switched R and T because it's multiplication. The order does not matter. That's why I wrote it like that. So I'm going to do 350 times 2.5. And now that is going to give me 875 R. Now we're going to divide both sides by 875. So 1750 divided by 875 is 0.02. Now remember, that is a decimal of a percentage. So we need to change that into percent form and write that our interest rate would be 2%, okay? So number 1, we found a balance. Number 2, we found the interest rate. Now let's take a look at finding an amount of time. So now we're going to deposit 10 grand or $10,000. That would be our principal. Our simple interest is $750, And now we know our interest rate. So now our missing variable here is t. So interest is $750. We have a $10,000 initial deposit. Our interest rate is 3%. So let's do 0.03. And then we need to find our time. So let's do 10,000 times 0.03. And that gives me 300. So we get 750 is equal to 300t. Let's divide both sides by 300. So 750 divided by 300, and that gives me 2.5. So t is equal to 2.5 years for number 3. Okay, so we found a balance, we found an annual interest rate, and we found time. Okay, so now our last example here, we're gonna find a monthly payment. Okay, so now this one's a little bit different. Now we're borrowing money. So we're borrowing $600, so that would be our principal. Our interest rate is 15%. Notice how the interest rate is higher on when we owe money versus when we earn money. Just a fact of life. It'd be nice if that was the other way around, right? So 15%, that is going to be our interest rate. It says the loan is paid off after 2 years of equal monthly payments. So T would be 2. And then how much were those payments? So we're actually going to figure out how much we are paying, and then we're going to divide that by 24. And then that will tell us how much we paid each month. Okay, so we don't know the interest, but we do know that we borrowed $600 at a 15% interest rate, and it took us 2 years. So let's do 600 times 0.15 times 2, and that's going to give me $180 in interest. Let's add that back to our amount that we borrowed. So this would be 600 plus $180, which would give us $780. And that would be the total amount of money that we have to pay back. We did that over 2 years of equal monthly payments. There's 12 months in a year. So if we want to figure out how much we paid each month, let's divide that by 24. So now we're going to do 780 divided by 24. And that tells me that each month we paid $32.50. Okay, so that's a little bit about the simple interest formula.